Hello. As we have attendees from all over the globe today, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for being with us. My name is Laura Heely and I'm an INSEAD 17J, joining you all from sunny Cornwall in southwest of the UK. It's a pleasure to connect with you all today. Before we begin, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors at Accenture, who have made the In the Case series possible. For those who haven't attended this series from Digital at INSEAD yet, these webinars deep dive into recent cases published by INSEAD together with case protagonists, industry experts, and presented by INSEAD faculty. These webinars seek to recreate class discussion online and offer insights into best practices and frameworks driving success. And they were designed to be interactive and engaging. INSEAD is a current leader in case publishing and produces about 70 to 80 new cases per year, authored by INSEAD faculty and research staff. In the case, the series by Digital at INSEAD spans a wide spectrum of topics on global digital transformation and provides a unique opportunity for industry practitioners to enjoy firsthand INSEAD teaching. For those who haven't yet visited publishing.insead.edu, you can access over 2,000 cases from the INSEAD collection. And now on to the main event. I am delighted to introduce you to Professor Enver Yucesan and our case protagonist, co-founder and former CEO of BeefChain, Rob Jennings. First, a few words on Professor Enver Yucesan. Enver is a professor of operations at INSEAD. His main teaching and research activities center on tactical operational problems such as process analysis, manufacturing planning and control, integrated logistics, and supply chain management. I had the pleasure of taking a supply chain management course whilst at INSEAD and later collaborating with him on this case. It's great to see you again, Enver, and thank you for staying up so late for this conversation. On to the man of the hour. Rob Jennings is a blockchain expert and beef enthusiast, if I may say so, who has pioneered a number of innovative applications of blockchain in agricultural supply chains, including BeefChain, the subject of our discussion today. Rob is passionate about using technology to improve the dynamics of the beef industry through what he calls rancher-centric supply chains. Rob hopes that blockchain can help ranchers recapture value in the supply chain now realized by intermediaries, and in the process improve health, traceability, and regulatory oversight. Look forward to digging into the details. Enver, if I may, the floor is yours to help set the scene on blockchain and food supply chains in general.
Great, thanks, Laura. Thanks for the introduction. It's really great to have a class reunion like this. Thank you, Rob. Again, it's really great that we're back on this case and discussing this. So let me be quite quick. Before I start talking about blockchain, though, let's run a quick poll to take the temperature in the, I guess, on the platform. Let's see how familiar you guys are with respect to the to this technology. So let's start the poll, and while you guys are answering the poll, I could actually start the discussion here. So let's see how familiar you guys are with respect to this technology. But before I start talking about the technology, though, I want to talk about the agricultural supply chains, because if this pandemic has taught us anything, it actually taught us the importance of agricultural supply chains, because we realized that no matter how much we love them, we cannot really eat our iPhones. When the agricultural supply chains broke down, we had actually empty shelves. We had shortages of different types of foodstuff. So this was actually quite a wake-up call for all of us, because regardless of their huge importance in our lives, agricultural supply chains have been, even before the pandemic, under a lot of stress. I mean, when you look at the usual regular operating conditions, this is actually an extremely long chain, from the input providers to farmers to the distributors, all the way to your table. There are actually a lot of intermediaries on the supply chain. It's also driven by Mother Nature, so the lead times are extremely long. And as a result, it's not only difficult to forecast demand, but it's also difficult to forecast the supply of products as well. Now, when that happens, of course, there are a lot of unhappy people under stress. Farmers carry the brunt of all this because they have to put in a lot of effort. They have to take a lot of risk. But at the end of the day, they may or may not be able to capture a commensurate portion of the value that they help create in this ecosystem. And as if this is not enough, things are actually becoming more complex. several mega trends. For example, we're going to be 9 billion people on this planet Earth by 2050, which means that with less arable land, with less fresh water, with less resources, we have to be able to feed these 9 billion people in an economically viable fashion. Other mega trends, we talk about climate change. Well, I guess the non-believers in climate change basically talk about, oh yeah, the temperature of the planet Earth will be increasing by 2 to 4 degrees centigrade, but that's going to be over the next 30 to 50 years, which is true. However, we already started feeling the impact of climate change through the more frequent occurrence of what is supposed to be rare extreme weather events. And every time something like this happens, fires, floods, huge droughts, we have a crop failure, we have again farmers carrying the brunt of all this. So what I'm trying to say here is that already these supply chains, agricultural supply chains, are under huge stress. At the other end of the chain, you and I as the consumers, we're also worried, we're also under stress in the following sense. We want to have safe, fresh food, regardless of the season, regardless of where this food is coming from, regardless of where this meat is coming from. So we're becoming a lot more demanding as well. Visibility is important. Provenance or the source of the food is important. Quality and freshness is important. And of course, we also want all of this at an affordable type of a price point. So as you can see, already this chain has been under a lot of stress, and yet the demands, the complexities, the requirements are also going up. So the issue is we have to look for solutions. A big good news was over the past maybe decade and a half has been the green revolution, the deployment of the technology, but even that is plateauing right now. So we need further technologies, we need further, I guess, help to make sure that this agricultural supply chain works in a very efficient fashion. And as a result, we're looking at, for example, blockchain to see whether or not blockchain can indeed be one of the possible solutions to actually resolve some of the issues, to actually alleviate some of the pain points. Maybe it's time to look at the results of our poll in terms of the blockchain. What I see here is that we actually have about 34% of our participants who are quite familiar with the technology, almost 60% novice to the technology, and we have, I guess, about 6% who have implemented the technology and 2% about users. This is perfect because we actually have in Rob not only an expert on the topic, but also someone who has lived through this. So this is perfect. This is perfect. But before I turn the floor over back to Laura and to Rob, let me say a few words about the blockchains. If we can go to the next slide, please. Now, in terms of, I guess, a blockchain is really nothing but a distributed ledger or a distributed database. And then when you read this sentence, you basically say, but hold on, there's nothing new here because distributed databases have been around for a long, long time. And you're right. The distributed databases have indeed been around for a long time. But here's the big difference. The traditional distributed databases, even though the actual records, the actual ledgers were distributed, had a single control tower, had a single control mechanism, which actually had two types of shortcomings. One is that control tower became the bottleneck in terms of managing the transactions, managing the traffic on this distributed database. And the second thing is that it actually increased the vulnerability of this ecosystem, because if you really wanted to do harm, you simply attacked the single point, which was the control tower, and the whole database came to a grinding halt. What the blockchain is giving us is actually full distribution, including the control tower, including the control. Now, of course, when we talk about blockchains, a lot of people talk about cryptocurrencies, which are run over public blockchains. And the whole point of this infrastructure is to enable a very large, almost an unlimited number of participants who are typically anonymous to actually transact among themselves. Now, the issue is in the supply chain, for supply chain types of applications, I actually, A, do not need an unlimited number of participants, and B, I actually want to know who they are. I actually want to know who my partners are, who I'm dealing with in this ecosystem. So as a result, as a supply chain person, when I look at the blockchain technology, I actually want private blockchain networks. I actually want a permissioned type of a system so that I select the stakeholders in my ecosystem, I qualify them, I induct them into the system, because there are several things that we have to worry about here. Part of it is with respect to governance in terms of the processes through which we induct different partners, in terms of how much of an information are we willing to share with one another, in terms of governance of resolving disputes when something is not going right. So all of these things have to be agreed upon jointly to make sure that the system indeed supports the supply chain. But equally importantly, in terms of the nuts and bolts, is the efficiency of the blockchain itself. Now, one of the big problems about these public blockchains that are indeed the backbone of all these cryptocurrencies is that you have to have the proof of work mechanism or the consensus mechanism, which actually is extremely computationally intensive and as a result, extremely energy intensive. Now, what that means, of course, is that it limits the number of transactions that you can carry out on a given day. So I've read someplace that, for instance, on Bitcoin, you can actually do up to 360,000 transactions on a given day due to these complexities. Well, when you look at, for example, the pharmaceutical supply chain in the United States, in a single day alone, we have to deal with something like 55 million transactions. So to be able to enable that volume of transactions, we need to have this private system, permission system, so that we can actually lighten up some of these protocols, some of these consensus protocols, so that we can indeed transact take care of these transactions fairly fast. So as a result, for supply chain types of applications, I am indeed a firm believer that this has to be permissioned, this has to be private. And in fact, BeefChain is a perfect example of this type of an infrastructure that connects this fairly complicated supply chain, but in a very trust-based type of a situation. But that's the type of discussion that we want to have with Rob, who's been actually doing this for a living. So let me turn it back over to Laura so that we can indeed hear the interesting journey that Rob has gone through.
Perfect. Thank you, Enver. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So to set the stage, most of our conversation today will center around cattle in Wyoming, in the Mountain West of the United States. Wyoming is the 10th largest state by area and home to the 15th largest population of cattle. Cattle is Wyoming's largest commodity, which every year means 1.3 million head of cattle are raised. And it's outnumbering the people in Wyoming just about 2 to 1. Which is a pretty interesting fact. If we can go to the next slide, please. For those who haven't been exposed to cattle ranching, we thought it would be helpful to give a super quick overview of the beef supply chain before we get into the main discussion. So how does a Wyoming beef cow end up one day as an Angus burger on your plate? The first step is the rancher selects the cow and the herd bull for breeding, which takes place in the summer, with about 1 bull to 25 to 50 cows. A few months later, ranchers can seek bank financing before calves are born. And this happens around the springtime. They're reared outside in that beautiful sort of pasture we saw a moment ago for about 6 to 8 weeks, at which point they're tagged with an ear dangle or RFID, which records parentage, geolocation, vaccines, any injuries or medical treatment. And then typically they're sold by ranchers in a group sale in what's known as a sale barn, often over state lines in huge lots across the Midwest. This is a key moment in the life cycle of a beef cow as it changes hands from the rancher. And it's also a moment of elevated risk for disease due to high density between herds. Cattle then move from sale barns to feedlots or backgrounders by fall, where they fatten up. And the following July, when the cattle is around 1.5 years old and 1,500 pounds, they're sold to a processor who harvests the beef and packages it for distribution. They're sold from these distributors across retail outlets, and approximately 10% will go overseas to places like Japan and Singapore, where Enver is with us today. In practice, there are many more than 10 steps and many more than 10 intermediaries involved in the Wyoming beef supply chain. But the most important things to keep in mind are that it's a very long supply chain. As Enver mentioned, it's about 1.5 to 2 years at a minimum. The rancher takes most of the risk and typically earns the smallest share of the profit. And this is due in part to the fact that when cattle enter the sale barn, they become a commodity and often lose touch with provenance and raising standards. As such, the middlemen in the chain, like processors, sale barns, retailers, capture most of the value and the profit. They're also very highly concentrated groups compared to the very dispersed network of ranchers. Now, I believe we've introduced enough complexity into the story. And then to simplify, Rob often talks about the fact that he's built his technology for two main players, the rancher family and the consumer family. And so there are a lot of families dialed in today, many of whom may be consumers of beef. So Rob asked that we do a quick poll. As a consumer of beef, are your purchases driven predominantly by price, cut, quality, and origin? So we'll do this quite quickly. And then we have another polling question to follow on the next slide, which is, would you be willing to pay more for beef or food more broadly if you don't eat beef, if you knew its origin? So on to the main event. Rob, we are delighted to have you here today. To kick things off, hey, Rob. Beef isn't typically the first thing that comes to mind when we hear the word blockchain. We were hoping you could tell us a little bit about why you started investigating blockchain's applications for the beef industry. I think we now have the results here on the poll to kick us off as well.
Yeah, quality. That's a fantastic reason to buy your beef. That should be your number one, unless of course you're at the lower end of the spectrum, and then of course price is always prevalent at the lower end of the spectrum. But I'm from Wyoming, left Wyoming, worked in Washington, D.C. for a number of years, but I've always had businesses in Wyoming. And for those of you who don't know, Wyoming is the state that invented the limited liability company. In 1977, originated the limited liability company. And so I've always been very familiar with how limited liability companies operate in Wyoming, and have set up many sort of as a sole proprietor on many businesses. I've set up sort of like systems, if you will, to protect myself from any kind of personal liability, third-party payments and accountants that, you know, like just verification, two-step, three-step verification processes for payments and handling of transactions. So when I first heard about blockchain, I you know, what is this? Back in 2016, I started investigating it, and I said, holy cow, this is something that would really match up with limited liability companies and the ability to manage operating agreements, to fractionalize ownership, to you know, just register the companies, attach unique identifiers to the companies, digital identity, things of this nature. And so I started the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition with some friends, and we couldn't even scrap together like 6 people to meet with us to talk about it. But we did get some legislators involved, and if you've been following it, you'll know that Wyoming is now a leader in the globe in recognizing banking and other types of use cases for blockchain, and essentially setting up what I would call a regulatory sandbox where investors and developers can feel comfortable landing their products in a state where they're not going to get sort of beat up, if you will, like New York or California or some of the higher regulatory states. So we passed these laws, and essentially we're sitting around saying, okay, we passed these laws, but how can we put this into practice for Wyoming? How can we take and create a use case for Wyoming? And one of the biggest issues facing Wyoming is they don't really have any processing plants. Okay, they have a series or a network of small plants around the state that might process 25 head a day or 25 head a week if you're lucky. So consequently, all of Wyoming's phenomenal beef, which is raised humanely, hormone free, antibiotic free, on good grasses and flora from the pastures, it was ending up, or it does end up, in Nebraska commodity feedlots, where it's in the same pen as some cow from Virginia or from, you know, elsewhere. And people in the Rocky Mountains pride themselves on how they manage and raise their beef. There's an ethos, you know, the cowboy code, they call it. So that was really what started this is how can we create provenance for Wyoming beef so it doesn't get lost in the supply chain and the producers might be able to realize real price discovery and start getting the dollars that they deserve for that product. So that was really the impetus for getting it started.
And you talk a lot about the solution being a rancher.
Questions there, or am I filibustering? Pardon me?
No, I don't know if it's my internet or yours, Rob, but I think that's perfect. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yes.
Okay, so you talked about the solution being a rancher-centric one, which makes a lot of sense in what you just shared. Can you explain a little bit more about what the value proposition is of using blockchain for a rancher in Wyoming?
Yes, and at its initial, I mean, at its core function, you're essentially creating an immutable traceability chain, if you will, for the cattle. So I'm gonna put that tag on them at birth. Or when we brand them, if you will, I'm gonna create a date of birth. I'm gonna create a GPS of where that calf was born or where it resides as a calf. And so I'm going to start just creating this immutable database of information. And that's really the first place that starts, because you're starting then now to create information that can not be, as Enver spoke earlier, siloed in your home computer or in a database somewhere, but can actually start to be more transparent and be more useful down the supply chain, or can start to travel with the animal. So at its basic, we were just really recording data points and hashing them into, we started with Bitcoin, and then we started hashing them into the Ethereum chain, just to record, simple movements and things of that nature. I would say that's 2017 technology. Today, there's a lot more that people are able to do, particularly with NFT, non-fungible tokens being a hot thing now. And so you can go from just creating that immutable chain to now creating more financial functionality, which includes tokenizing the animal, fractionalizing the animal, creating a proof of ownership, transfer of ownership, and all sort of those financial tools that are starting to really now come into play that 2 or 3 years ago just weren't quite there yet.
We have a pretty practical question from Farhan, who is wondering, when we're starting to tag the cow, how is that happening?
Yeah, sure. Well, I use a term called tagnostic. So I'm not with BeefChain anymore, as some of you do. I've got a new project called Cattle Pass, which is a little sort of a variation of what we were doing at BeefChain, but it's really IoT collection, right? So from my perspective, whatever tag you're using is fine with me. So you have a visual tag that just hangs off the ear, and the rancher could take a photo of it and upload that. I can put on a low frequency RFID tag, which is the most common in the industry and the cheapest price. Put that in the ear, read it with an RFID scanner, and then port that information via Bluetooth to my phone. Or now we're working more into less of the RFID, but more into Bluetooth technology, ear tags and implants that will actually give you what I would call proof of life, which is a temperature reading and things of this nature while the animal is live. And it might also be a predictor of pregnancy or illness or things, or just death, quite frankly, too. So there's a variation of tags. You could even put a tattoo in the ear and I could record that. So, and then of course, there's always the brand, which is actually heating the branding iron and branding the cattle. But I think with this digital technology, we're actually moving away from that. Does that answer the question?
I think so. So we talked a little bit about the value proposition for the ranchers. So capturing a higher price, taking more value along the chain. We mentioned earlier, decreasing disease, and there's some regulatory benefits. But how would you think about the benefit for a BeefChain solution or a blockchain solution for consumers of beef or agriculture?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the goal here, and we've said this from the beginning, and I think blockchain across the board becomes a great disintermediator. And disintermediation is really the goal, because that's where you're now bringing the rancher and the consumer, the end buyer, closer together. And that's what we've always wanted. We want to connect the two most important people in the chain, the person consuming the food and the person producing the food. So for us, blockchain and the functionality around it, like tokenization and smart contracts, would allow the producer to, what I call retained ownership, is to have ownership of the animal longer in the supply chain. And then potentially, in what we're doing in Nebraska, starting in June, is we're actually working with a rancher who sells direct to consumers. So what we're doing is now tagging those animals actually with an implant, and then following and tracing them all the way through the processor until that's a box of beef with a QR code on it. So the end buyer can buy directly from the producer, can be verified with all of the data and information that travels with that animal, and can have an assurance that the beef is high quality and exactly what they're seeking in a product. So, I'm sort of rambling. I don't know if that answers the question, but what it really aims to do is give the consumer more information, shorten the supply chain, and allow consumers to support producers that carry their values, right? If you're looking for organic beef or sustainable production, or any of these regenerative ranching, or any of these type of things that many producers are doing these days, this would enable you to verify that data, and then through tokenization and eventually financial markets, whether you're a wholesale buyer or a consumer, potentially buy beef from producers directly, and thus you getting a higher quality of beef, you knowing where it came from, and then the producer being rewarded for all the sustainable and good work that they're doing. Yeah, so that's the goal, is cut out the middleman, the people that are buying animals on the float or at sale barns or things like this, and really try to let the producer get more of that end product.
That's really interesting.
And I should just add one other thing. A system like this incentivizes, in my opinion, producers to take better care of their animals, to do things, because now it democratizes the marketplace. It makes the marketplace more transparent, and now they have to compete with producers that are doing things. It moves it more towards what the marketplace wants. And so now, to get that premium price, you're going to have to, do what the consumers are demanding. And I should say, you see that in the crypto markets, or you see that even in the Robinhood app, where you're seeing a democratized marketplace. You're seeing more people participating in the purchase of these things. And that's what we want to do, is democratize the marketplace for the producers.
Do you think that everyone in the ecosystem is up for that sort of open, transparent model? Are you seeing any sort of reticence across the ecosystem to adopt a more transparent supply chain, which consumers and ranchers would want?
There is some reluctance. I do go back to Enver's earlier conversation. We talk about a permissioned blockchain. So not all data collected needs to be shared with all parties in the supply chain. Some of it is proprietary, right? So what you do when you have a permissioned blockchain is, as I tokenize that animal, I create an Ethereum token, an ERC 721 token around that animal, and that goes into the digital wallet of the owner. As that either transfers ownership or even just stays in that wallet, I can add metadata to that token, right? So I'm adding all of this information. It might be on medical treatments, it might be on locations, whatever you're doing to whatever you're feeding it, all that. Obviously, the consumer doesn't need all of that information, but some of that information might be helpful to the governmental regulatory agency or the USDA, or a buyer, or a veterinarian, or someone that needs a health certificate. So then we're collecting the data, and we can create a permissioned blockchain. And this is what I tell ranchers, is this is a way, we're creating a network effect by doing this. And this is a way for you to have control of your data and permission who gets to see it. and the ranchers might even be able to sell their data someday if they want to Merck or, you know, to any company that might be interested in this information. But again, the rancher owns the data and they can permission it. So do I think the consumer wants to know like all 16 traits that I would find from a genomics test on a calf? No. But that might be important to a buyer. It might be important to the way you price your animals the next time you sell them. You know, so yeah, permission to blockchain. And I will say this too, there is some reluctance. People say, oh, we don't want to share our information. The black helicopters are going to come in and steal our cattle. But what I say to them is I say, look, if we create a rancher-centric network where we're trading and exchanging amongst ourselves in this permissioned blockchain, I think you're actually preventing sort of the large government takeover, if you will, because you're creating regulatory compliance, but you're building this framework that fits your business flow as opposed to a sort of one-size-fits-all mandate from the government. So I'm a big believer that creating financial incentives and improving business flow is a way to get ranchers to participate in animal disease traceability and sustainability programs, rather than just a one-size-fits-all coming down on top of them. So, and even a lot of ranchers are big here in the United States on what's called country of origin labeling, meaning the beef has to say it's from Mexico or Brazil or the United States. And they want country of origin labeling, but they don't want to do traceability. And that, you know, I'm like, okay, hold on a second here. Blockchain is country of origin labeling, and it's not mandated by the government, it's voluntary. And then you go out and create those marketplaces that want to buy your country of origin product, you know. So I think this enables people to do things without having to have the cudgel of the big government coming in and creating one size fits all, which really doesn't work in a global marketplace.
Rob, you touched on a moment ago choosing to use the Ethereum network to build your blockchain. Your private blockchain, are there any other options that you considered? And can you walk us through why you ended up choosing the model at BeefChain that you did?
Yeah, sure. And I speak for Cattle Pass right now, so I'm not sure what blockchain the guys at BeefChain are utilizing. But even at the beginning, we were blockchain agnostic, and I think everybody that's in this space really should be at this point, because, you know, again, you looked at IBM Food Trust was using Hyperledger, and that's kind of faltered a little bit. You had a BeefChain. We were talking with BeefChain, and they're a good group. And there's Cardano, there's Ethereum. I think right now Ethereum is the leader in smart contracts and also non-fungible tokens, which you're hearing a lot about in the art world, NFTs. So Ethereum is the place to do that. But yeah, you know, I just think they happen to be sort of the most consumer friendly at this point, but that can always shift. You know, I mean, I think you have to, the problem with Ethereum now is price, is the cost is going up, and it makes it a little inefficient to do a lot of transactions. So there's a little bit of navigation there. But we would always be open to any chain. We've talked with MasterCard, a number of them. Ultimately, what you want is something that you can trust, something that has scalability, something that's affordable for the producers, and something that's going to be there, you know, the week after next or so. So yeah, it's in flux a little bit, but you know, and we're sort of utilizing also what I would call a hybrid. It's blockchain with a cloud-based, you know, and we're using Google Cloud. So I think that's what a lot of people are also doing right now.
Victor from the audience asked if you used a private.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
Perfectly. If you can hear me, Rob. Victor,
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
Sure. Victor from the audience asked if you could use a private network just based on the cloud, could you do that instead of leveraging blockchain? Or is there a real reason that you think that blockchain is required for this sort of solution?
Well, yeah, you could. I mean, I'm not like, oh, blockchain is the 100%. I mean, what I always refer to as an immutable digital ledger. And so the immutability is what's really important there. And then also the smart contract functionality. So yes, could you get into something that's post blockchain, if you will, or just more generally described as digital ledger technology? Absolutely. But you do have to create that immutability. And I do like the idea of a decentralized network, you know. So interestingly enough, as a lot of this, what we call DeFi, moves forward, there does seem to be some centralization of some of this stuff too. And so that, you know, it's, you have Visa having a blockchain or MasterCard with a blockchain. Those can all be helpful, but that's also a centralization. So, you know, ideally you would have a decentralized network that involves your producers, the participants actually in the network running the nodes of the network. So, you know, that's your perfect scenario, I think.
That's perfect. Well, thanks, Rob. Moving on to a different topic, we were hoping you would talk a little bit about the business model, and specifically the value that a rancher can gain by joining BeefChain or Cattle Pass, and potentially holding the asset or ownership of the asset for longer.
Yes, and I'm just take a sip for a second. Thank you. I think honestly, with blockchain, in particularly what I would call this enterprise blockchain, some of the business or profitability is to be determined. I think it's still in that stage, quite honestly. But in this instance, what we're trying to do with Cattle Pass is create a smart contract code around a smart contract that would essentially enable the producers to tokenize the animal and create a proof of ownership, and then create a change of ownership with that token. And then inside of that token, be able to fractionalize it. So what I think the benefit there is long-term is that you're creating a financial market where essentially the token is based on a real live asset. And that could either be an individual cow or it could be a herd. And I was talking with a rancher in Oklahoma last night, and we were talking about tokenizing a bull, a breeding bull, which can be worth as much as $1 million, right? So these are expensive. So what I think that the initial value is, one, you're creating provenance. So there's some value there, right? We're learning about that value. But secondly, now you're creating this tokenization and this sort of financial functionality where I could now collateralize those animals for either a bank, or I could potentially create fractional ownership or investment. The fractional ownership could either result in me sending you a box of beef at the end of the process, or it could be just simply you investing in my herd and you realizing a profit when the animals sell. So sort of like, you know, just creating a token around a herd and then selling 1,000 shares of it. And I think that's a potential benefit where producers could essentially crowd fund the animals, and that's what we're working on. I think also tokenization can benefit in regulatory compliance, and we're seeing that in Nebraska, where we're creating the ability to do electronic brand inspection. So now a brand inspector, a physical person, has to drive to a ranch and inspect the animals before giving the rancher permission to sell them. In this instance, if they were tagged and brought into the system ahead of time, into a blockchain platform or an immutable ledger, then you could essentially do an e-verification or a digital certification, which would save time, money, and resources from having to drive long distances to validate the animals. And then you can also create this easy system for change of ownership and validation. Currently, I would add that when a brand inspector goes out and inspects a herd of 100 animals, he does have a little laptop with him. He prints out a piece of paper, he gives it to the rancher, and he says, okay, this validates that these 100 animals are yours, and now you can sell them. That's one little piece of paper for 100 animals. If I create tokens around that herd and tokenize every animal, I can attach this digitally to those tokens. And now when those 100 animals are dispersed throughout the supply chain, that proof of ownership and that provenance travels with every animal and is available to be read with every animal. So this adds value in animal disease traceability. This adds value in knowing where your meat came from, what kind of attributes it has, whether it's non-hormone or antibiotic or whatever it is, or grass-fed, grain-fed, whatever the different attributes might be. It makes the information able to travel with the animal. So we think that's the revolutionary part. We also think that the ability to fractionalize the herd, fractionalize shares in your herd, is also going to help ranchers create functionality and financing. And it also gives the consumer the ability to, in my opinion, support ranchers that support their values. So if you want to support organic farming, if you want to support female-owned ranching, you want to support sustainability and regenerative ranching, then you could buy the tokens in these herds and support the ranchers and the farmers who are using and utilizing these types of processes, if you will. And then also, by the way, now you can validate them through third-party certifiers and a digital ledger. Yes.
On that
Does that answer
subject,
the question?
absolutely, and many more. But on the subject of provenance, I think a question or a word that comes up quite often is trust. And trust in supply chains. We've all been stuck at home watching Netflix, Seaspiracy and lots of others that talk about supply chains that we might not fully understand or have been opaque in the past. How do you think about trust in the context of beef industry, and how can adding these solutions like BeefChain and Cattle Pass add to trust for consumers?
Well, and that's the basic premise of blockchain is it's a trustless system. I don't trust you, you don't trust me, but we can trust the data and we can trust the immutability of the data. At the very beginning, I think IoT technology has to catch up a little bit. They do have like vaccination guns now that will Bluetooth to your phone and tell you the exact milliliters and what was given. So the more technology we can, the more we can really confirm this data. At the very beginning, when you're putting your cattle on a blockchain or you're recording this information, it really is affidavit based. I mean, you're trusting that the rancher that's doing this in the beginning is doing this. But when you start getting into forward contracting with buyers and you start getting into third-party certifiers for organics or non-hormone treated or all these kind of things, you might be able to lie at the beginning, but as you get down the supply chain with all of this data verified, they're going to be able to catch up to you. It's because now really the paper trail in farming, organic farming or organic ranching is just that. It's paper, and it's a lot of paper, and it's a lot of like sort of, it can be a little bit murky. I'll admit that. And I think everybody knows that. So what we're trying to do is create that trustless system. But at the beginning, it starts as an affidavit. I'm basically putting my cattle on a blockchain and I'm swearing that this is what we're doing. But I can do as much as I can at the beginning to collect a GPS location, a premise ID, which is a USDA identifier of the ranch. I can qualify the ranchers before they can put their information on a platform. So if they do cheat, lie, or do whatever, eventually you could just ban them from the platform or kick them off of the platform because there do have to be rules that are enforced and enhanced. But as IoT technology gets better, we're able to more sort of take the human factor out of this data collection and make it more automated. And that's ultimately what's going to give us the true trustless system.
Rob, that's great. Thank you so much. I'm looking at the Q&A we have with just 15 minutes to go. Don't know, Rob, if you've had a chance and you see any questions you absolutely want to answer, in which case, please feel free. But thank you all for adding questions. Well, otherwise we'll direct you, so no problem. But thank you all for adding questions. And if anyone has a burning question they haven't asked or wants to upvote another, please do so.
Now I see a lot of questions on here. Yeah, and I'm looking at sort of just some general. I see one about like carbon capture and things of this nature. Um, a baby cow all the way to consumer stuff. And also, I'll give you guys my email address real quick. It's rwjenning, rwjenning @gmail.com. And if you want to email me, you can certainly do that. And I think I've touched on a few of those. Yes, we are seeing support of blockchain initiatives from larger companies, JBS, who's a global producer, and quite frankly, part of the problem for ranchers, quite frankly. They're launching a blockchain initiative in Brazil. Walmart is obviously very interested. Golden Foods, which supplies McDonald's. And we get a lot of interest from producers who are looking for, like, if I produce an all natural beef jerky stick, right? Everybody wants organic beef jerky sticks or all natural products or things of this nature. It's very difficult for these people producing those products to get enough supply of product that meets the standards of what they need. And so consequently, sometimes we had a guy that was making all natural beef sticks and he was having to buy the whole cow just to get a little part of it. And then he was having to spend all of his time selling off the other parts that he didn't need. And so in this type of a system, I think you can create, when you're recording immutable attributes, what we hope it does is create a marketplace where people who are creating these products, all natural beef or this, that, or the other, can shop for the products that they need, can have more direct access to the all natural beef or to this. And so those end producers can create more direct relationships with the actual suppliers of these products. So yes, we hope we shorten that chain and allow these products to be better utilized in the system, if you will. And I was trying to look at some of these other questions that pop up. Let's see. I'm a veggie, one guy says. All right. Is he a tomato or a carrot, I guess?
Rob, there's a question from Rosa who asks about the fact that it seems like this technology is more aligned with premium producers. So this is a very expensive product. Of beef cattle is definitely an expensive commodity. Do you think that it can evolve beyond premium markets to be more widely adopted, whether that's just within beef at a lower price point or outside of beef to other commodities?
Yes, and I agree with that. I think currently the low-hanging fruit are the producers who are producing a higher premium quality, that are doing, look, beef is a commodity, right? So for a lot of ranchers, it's like a cow is a dollar bill, you know what I mean? And it just, they're in and out. They don't want you to know where it came from. They don't want to know anything. Boom, boom, it's gone. Give me the cash. But that's not how the industry is moving. That's, the consumers are demanding more. The export buyers, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Asian buyers are demanding more. The European buyers are demanding more. So yes, I think that this technology helps even what you would call lower end producers. I think it helps them at a minimum with regulatory compliance, because what you will see is a lot of these, what I would call lower end beef that come from the East Coast or Florida or wherever, that are getting shipped into Nebraska to go to feedlots and processing, they still have to be inspected when they cross state lines. So if I can put a tag in that animal, tokenize it, and create a health certificate that is attached to that token, when it crosses the state line, that's going to reduce the time and cost for regulatory compliance. So I think that, overall, yes, it will bring all of those people into the marketplace. And I think at some level, there may be some producers in the future that sort of get washed out of the marketplace, but the idea is that you're creating a system that brings up even, your commodity guys and things of this nature, because yes, you're sorting out the premium beef, but you're also creating efficiencies and financial functionality for anybody who is buying and selling cattle. And I would add one other thing. What I would love to see one day is, because currently the big processors like JBS, Tyson, Cargill, they're basically setting the prices, right? And a lot of times at these sale barns, they'll be the only buyers in the room, and they're kind of setting the prices. Ultimately, I would love to see the processors really just be a pass through, where the ranchers retain ownership all the way through, and then the processor is just an at cost thing, and then the beef is going on straight to the consumer. That's how we create a more streamlined process. That's how we create more real price discovery, and the ranchers could, hopefully can go from price makers instead of being price takers, which they currently are now as price takers. Was that a ramble? Did I get off point?
Perfect, as always. I'm just looking through, there are tons of questions now open. I don't know if Enver, you had any that you wanted to flag for Rob to answer?
Actually, Rob, I have two questions for you. One of them is that we talked about different stakeholders along this chain, but we didn't talk about the platform itself. What's the business model of the platform? How does the platform make that dollar? How do you make the platform economically viable?
Yes, and I think that's a very good question. For me, blockchain has always been a transaction business. And currently, if I sell my cattle at a sale barn, I might pay 5%, on that sale. I might pay 3% or something like that. If I can create a platform that enables people to transact cattle and we're at a 0.5% or even a flat fee or something like that, I think that's success. So to me, it becomes a transaction business. There are apps out there that become data or become subscription models. You pay $20 and you have access. That's potentially something that's viable also. But with this platform, we want to be agnostic to any sort of data collection software, data collection devices, things of this nature, and really want to be a transactional where we're certifying data points and then creating that smart contract that allows you to have tokenize the animal out in the field, create proof of ownership, and then be able to fractionalize the animal or transact the animal or anything of this nature, all while maintaining its data integrity. Also, I think there are opportunities in selling data. But again, in our model, it's a rancher-owned process. So if you have a lot of ranchers in a network and there's data that's out there and buyers want to pay ranchers for that data, we believe that the rancher should be able to opt in on those opportunities. Say, okay, yeah, I'll sell it to Allflex today. They want to know XYZ. Okay, they're paying 10 cents a head or $1 a head. And then you can create that automatic payment system through digital wallets and things of this nature. So what we hope to do really is create financial functionality around the use of the blockchain. I do believe that's a transaction model, but I will be honest, to date, we're just, I'm doing this because I believe in it and I want to see it through. And, we're just enjoying it. And if we're successful, then we're helping people. And that's sort of the whole point here, right? Is to help people and create, an opportunity for people, because ranchers struggle. And these guys are lucky to be breaking even half the time. And when you see high beef prices, understand that the rancher's not really seeing that. Everybody else is seeing that. And, so anyway, yeah. Is there another question? I'll let you do it there, Enver.
Yeah, let me ask my second question. In fact, this is the question that Maria asked originally, and this is something that keeps me awake at night as well. Blockchain as a platform is great to manage information flows. It's great to manage cash flows, and you can do all sorts of financial derivatives based on this. But what gets me is that how do I make sure that the material flow is tamper-proof? In other words, how do I make sure that nobody actually the data does indeed reflect the physical animal that I think I'm following, and as we go through the different stages of the supply chain, in particular, we go through the processing plant, how do I make sure that I still keep data consistent with the actual material flow?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Now we use, with the ear tag, it's an RFID tag, it's an tamper-proof, right? So if the tag is removed, it's removed. So if you were to tag your animals and put them on chain, and you forward contract with someone to buy those animals, if that animal shows up at the market without that ear tag, then it's automatically removed from the system and it cannot be validated. And these ear tags are not removable. What we're doing with Cattle Pass on June 7th, we're working with an Australian company called Livestock Labs, and we are actually doing implants into the cattle. So it's a small implant that will go into the shoulder, under the skin, but not into the meat or the flesh or anything of that nature. And it will give temperature readings. And so we were calling this proof of life. So in that instance, you're going to have an embedded implant in that animal that's also going to be giving out GPS readings and things of this nature. So yes, we are working towards how do we get to that immutability and knowing that that animal is what it says it is. For the processor, currently we're working with small processors, right? So it's very easy for a small processor to take an animal through in an abattoir and say, okay, this is this animal. If I get to the floor of a large kill plant like Tyson JBS, it becomes a lot more difficult. I do guarantee you, though, those guys know where that beef is coming from, and they are able to trace it through the plants. It's just that they're not being transparent about it right now. They're being opaque in that information. So I believe the technology to track them through these large plants is already there, but it currently sits on one side of the aisle there with the processors, and they're not sharing that backwards. Some cases they do share carcass data backwards, but we're hoping that they become more transparent. And yes, again, if the processors were simply a pass through, then we'd have a better guarantee of the provenance. Does that answer that question?
Absolutely. No,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you. This is, I guess, this is still the Achilles heel of this. And I think we need the technology to catch up on the material physical flow side, as they have been developing mostly on the information and cash flow side. I guess it's much easier to deal with bits than the actual molecules, so to speak. And at some point, they have to catch up with one another. Absolutely.
And I do think we are catching up. And I would just say, finally, this technology does more to create immutability of characteristics and attributes of animals than anything else does. And if you go to your store and pick up a product that says it's organic or that it's this, that, or the other, at the end of the day, the only thing that lets you know it's organic is it's got a little stamp on the box. And we are finding a lot of fraud in organic beef and seafood and all of these type of things. So I think the industry has to start adopting ways to police itself, or they're going to start having a large credibility problems.
That's very true. Brandon, by the way, has signaled a company, Identigen, that actually provides DNA traceability for beef. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, I know Identigen. Yes, we know them, and we're working currently with Neogen. But all of those companies are great. And from the Cattle Pass platform perspective, we welcome integration with all of them, and because again, whatever the producer uses for his business flow is what we want to be able to adopt. And we're looking for like big red button technology that makes it very easy for producers to participate.
Khalil has a very long question, but Khalil, I think given the fact that we're almost out of time, what I promise you is that I'll send you an email with my perspective on your long question so that we won't ignore this. Let's see if we can take a... Rob, actually, it looks like you're a serial entrepreneur. So you're now into a Cattle Pass. So with 1 minute left, can you say a few more words about Cattle Pass and what the objective is with respect to this new initiative?
Yeah, sure. Cattle Pass, BeefChain became more what I would call a process verified program, which was really just about verifying whether it's non-hormone treated or whatever. Cattle Pass is agnostic to all of that. So however you're collecting data or whatever data you're collecting, we just aim to be a platform, a platform where IoT collection devices, data collection can all rest and reside where producers can register their cattle and create proof of ownership. And then, like I said, we're building a smart contract that will essentially tokenize the animal and then allow you to store that token in your digital wallet and then transfer that token to someone else. So that's sort of our secret sauce, is creating the proof of ownership and change of ownership functionality which then leads into sort of, fractionalization and all the other kind of tools that you might be able to utilize. But we're doing e-brand inspection and things of this nature. So we want to create a platform that's open to all people that are collecting data in the cattle industry, all IoT tools, and a place where they can sort of tokenize that data, attach it to an animal, and then transfer it through the supply chain. So June 7th, you'll see what we're doing. It'll be in Drovers Magazine, and also Vice Media is coming, and some others will be implanting, or actually this is the first time we'll be implanting into the animal, putting them on a blockchain in the field, and then tokenizing that animal through smart contracts. So we're just trying to take the process, one step further if we can.
That's great. No, we'll be watching very closely, Rob. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we're 2 minutes over time. So let me first of all thank Rob for this very stimulating discussion. Thank you very much, Laura, for keeping us honest and asking these interesting questions. I'd also like to thank Sandra and Pascal behind the scenes who organized this entire thing. Once again, a big thank you to Accenture, our sponsor, but most of all, thank you so much to all of you, our participants in today's discussion. Again, you will get an email summarizing, key points, our email addresses, and we hope that this is the beginning of a fruitful discussion. So we hope that we'll continue hearing from you on this very interesting and very, very fast-moving type of a platform. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day. Have a great evening. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.